Welcome to Two Fools for Christ. Today's show will be a broad overview of the composition of the church in both its Eastern and Western rites. St. John Paul II, in his encyclical Ut Unum Sint, said the church must breathe with her two lungs. And in this, the great saint tried to conceptualize both the Eastern and Western sources of patristics and theology and liturgy, cooperating and sanctifying and edifying the faithful of the universal church. And so in the minds of most Catholics, there remains a fundamental category of both Western, or often called Roman Catholics, and Eastern Catholics. Eastern Catholics being Catholics that come from the rites which descend from the Eastern Patriarchates of the Roman Empire. And so this forms the basis of the discussion of this video, where, as I've titled the video, I believe that there are significant limitations with this conception of the church, conceiving it of East and West. It's rooted in a legitimate principle, which I'll go over, but nevertheless, when taken as anything deeper than a mere signification of geographical descent, can actually become an impediment from a proper understanding of the liturgical and more especially theological and patristic sources of the church. So let's take a look at the map that's on the screen. I love this map because this map very clearly conceptualizes what this video is about. On the western side, you see that the western half of the Roman Empire is underneath the Patriarchate of the Bishop of Rome. And even though you have patriarchs in the West and developed over time, different major European nations are given patriarchates, broadly speaking, the patriarchate domain of the Bishop of Rome extends across the entire Western Roman Empire. So even though the Bishop of Rome operates as a universal head, his jurisdiction is threefold, or fourfold really. He remains the priest of the Church of St. John Lateran. He is the bishop of the Diocese of Rome. He is the metropolitan of the bishops of Italy. He is the patriarch of the West and the universal head of the Catholic Church. And so, in ecclesiology, you don't want to collapse all these unique functions that the Bishop of Rome holds simultaneously. And so it's still proper to speak of the Bishop of Rome as the patriarch of the West. And this extends into Northern Africa, the western side of North Africa, and it extends through France, Spain, Portugal, up into the Britons, across Italy, and to the east, up until the border with Constantinople. And so Rome there, the Patriarch of Rome, the Patriarchate of Rome, encapsulates the entirety of what was the western half of the Roman Empire. And this is where the real aspect of the Western and Eastern terms come in. Because Rome at one stage had two emperors. It was actually unified by Constantine the Great. But prior to Constantine, the Roman Empire got so unruly for one emperor that they created both a Western and Eastern half that were governed by two separate emperors. And so therefore, there is a true sense in which we can use the term Western and Eastern Catholic. An Eastern Catholic can refer more broadly to all the Christians that descend from the rites and patriarchates of the church that exist in the geographical borders of the Eastern Roman Empire. Nevertheless, you can see how this conception limits itself rather significantly to the state, the geopolitical state of the Roman Empire in the 4th, 5th, and 6th centuries. And therefore, the terms Eastern Catholic doesn't accurately distinguish the unique ecclesiastical hierarchy, patristics, patristic sources and patristic fathers, and liturgical reality of the diverse Christians in the east of the Roman Empire. And this video isn't simply to quote unquote complain about the lack of precision in this. The intention of this video is to make clear why an uncritical use of this term can be and is often an active detriment in the way a theologian or historian will approach the theological disputes and theological sources of the first millennia. So I will explain. We can see in what corresponds with the eastern half of the Roman Empire, 4 patriarchates. In the early diptychs of the church, established at Nicaea, and not recognized as changed by Rome until 1258 or 1252 at the Second Council of Lyons, the hierarchy of the patriarchal sees after the Bishop of Rome was the Bishop of Alexandria, the Bishop of Antioch, followed by the Bishop of Jerusalem, and then the Bishop of Constantinople was after that. And these sees were ranked as such because of their establishment by the Blessed Peter, by sending Mark to Alexandria and him going to Antioch first, and then from there James being at Jerusalem and all the apostles being at Jerusalem put it at 4th, and then Constantinople was designated a patriarchate because eventually it did become the see of the emperor. Now, Constantinople sought to elevate their status to second at the Second Council of Constantinople, and then at Chalcedon in Canon 28. Pope Leo the Great rejected this, and Rome continually rejected and refused to accept that canon until Second Lyons. And so, in my conception, and being an Antiochian Christian, biased to the fact that I think Antioch should not be demoted on account of Constantinople, in the first 1,000 years of the church, and it was only changed for the sake of unity, Rome recognized the original hierarchy of the universal church, that being Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, Constantinople. And from there, other patriarchs ranked below. Now, each of these patriarchates have famous saints, have their own theological schools, have their own languages, their own liturgies that characterize them in unique schools of thought. See, in the West, there is something similar to this, but it's not at the same extent because the West did their theology all in Latin, which created a general homogeneous school of thought. Now, of course, even into the second millennia, we see unique schools of thought between the scholastics, even among the Dominicans. You have Spanish Dominicans, French Dominicans, Portuguese Dominicans, and these were reflective of actual schools and different opinions. So I don't want to paint Rome and the Western half of Christendom as being this homogeneous blot. It wasn't. Even prior to Trent, all of these countries had their own liturgical rites. So one could even say the same thing of the West, as I'm about to say of the East, in that there are legitimate differences. Nevertheless, there's one added difference in the East in that they actually are under unique patriarchates, which means that their court of appeals are different. And the way they approach the universal church is through a different hierarchical structure because they're under a different patriarchate who is in communion with the Bishop of Rome. But to simply view the East as all this Eastern Catholic saints, Eastern Catholic liturgies, as if they are homogeneous, is significantly problematic. And I think it stems from the fact that most of Catholic interactions with the East is in relation to the Eastern Orthodox. And the Eastern Orthodox communions, being Constantinople, Russia, Antioch, that group, underwent a significant shifting of all the liturgical rites, beginning with Antioch and Alexandria under Emperor Justinian II, to Byzantify them. And so in the Eastern Orthodox community, all of these patriarchates have the same liturgy and they've all become homogenized, but that's artificial. That's artificial. We do not recognize that. Within the Catholic Church, being the true church, it has preserved the unique liturgical rites that were handed down by the apostles. Only in the Catholic Church can any Christian from any country in the world come into communion of the true church and be able to worship in the manner of their father, of their father's father, and from their descendants, from their ancestors going back to the early church. So only in the Catholic communion do we have all the original liturgies still preserved under each of the patriarchates. If you enter into the Eastern Orthodox community, well, you can only really be Byzantine. If you enter the Coptic Orthodox, they don't have a Latin rite. While only in the Catholic community does there exist the liturgy of St. James, the liturgy of the Roman Rite, the various other Roman liturgies of their religious orders, the Alexandrian liturgies, the liturgies of St. Basil, the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom in Constantinople. And so only in the Catholic Church is all of this preserved and on display in such a way that you can enter into the truth of the true church without having to abandon your cultural inheritance. So it's not an absolute mark of the church, but I do believe that it is a clear mark of the truth of the Catholic Church. So when you approach the early church, the first millennia, you're going to look at these ecumenical councils and there's squabbles between all of the Eastern patriarchates. So if you collapse this into this one notion of a homogeneous Eastern Catholic identity, there is a fundamental flaw there. The church is not two, church is one. But in its composition, at least, it isn't divided between West and East. It is divided between the Latins, which is a reference to the identity, cultural and ethnic identity of the Western Christians, because it's expressive in their theological process. You have the Alexandrians, those in Egypt, again, expressive of their culture, of their ethnicity, and of a particular way of thinking that was established by their fathers. You have the Syrians of Antioch, what are commonly called the Greeks of Constantinople, and of Jerusalem. It would be also of a similar ethnic identity to the Antiochian church. But it would have also have contained, in the earliest parts of the church, a good deal of Jewish converts to the faith. And so to collapse the Alexandrians and the people from Constantinople as one is problematic. It's problematic because they aren't one any more than Rome and Alexandria is one. They neither share a liturgy, nor common fathers, nor schools of theology, nor languages to express themselves, nor culture. So Alexandria and Rome are one in the same way that Rome and Constantinople and Alexandria are one. And so really to collapse them in this broader Eastern identity is only reflective of their geographical location in the Roman Empire. It's not an accurate liturgical or theological descriptor. That is the point of this video. And because of this, if you don't recognize that first, then what ends up happening, and I've seen this at the level of spirituality and I've seen this at the level of theology. So in the level of spirituality, what this ends up meaning, I've seen, for example, and I can only speak to my own right. I'm a Maronite. I have seen Maronites who, in seeking to be more Maronite, have sought to just become more Eastern Catholic generally, and have ended up just becoming Byzantified, and have ended up just embracing and immersing themselves in the tradition of the Greeks, which isn't problematic. I'm of the opinion that you should be well immersed theologically and liturgically in all the rites, but firmly rooted in your own tradition. But what I'm getting at is that in seeking to be more Maronite, to be more Antiochian, to be more Syriac, all they've done is become more liturgically and theologically aligned in a Byzantine manner, but not in a Syriac manner. So that's one way that it can actually affect the spirituality of a person. Not that it's bad to be Byzantine, but that in seeking to do what is naturally and also commended by the church, which is to preserve your own right, they've actually accidentally gone and immersed themselves in another right. Now, theologically and historically, this also has shortcomings. And the shortcomings in this regard is that when you approach the early church, you're going to see very quickly that there were major differences in theological schools. You had the Greeks and the Cappadocians. You have the school of Antioch in Antioch. You have the school of Alexandria in Alexandria. And each of these have famous saints that hail from them and are reflective of different theologies and are also consequently the cause of certain theological disputes in the early church. So, what's a classic example of this? Well, in Alexandria, you have famous saints. St. Anthony the Great, Alexandrian. St. Athanasius, Alexandrian. St. Cyril of Alexandria, Alexandrian. Origen, notorious, Alexandrian. In Antioch, you have the Antiochian school of thought. And these men also played a role. For example, Theodoret of Cyrus was strongly opposed to St. Cyril of Alexandria. He was Antiochian in thought and only reconciled at Chalcedon. John of Antioch and St. Cyril also had mild tensions because John of Antioch was trying to be more sympathetic to Nestorius of Constantinople than Cyril of Alexandria was willing to be. But all of this is because the different languages of the Alexandrian and Antiochian schools resulted in different expressions that often cause the basis of a lot of the ironing out that needed to be done at the ecumenical councils of Nicaea, Constantinople, Ephesus, Chalcedon, Constantinople II, and so on. And so when you break this apart, and rather than having, and I think that the plea to this of this video is, if you are an Eastern Catholic, do not have a generic Eastern Catholic identity. Have a unique identity to your right. Perceive yourself in history as an Antiochian, or a Greek, or an Alexandrian, or one of the Church of Jerusalem. Just like in the West, they perceive themselves as, broadly speaking, Latins. This isn't to introduce into the church concrete divisions, not at all. The church celebrates the different theological schools, whether that's across patriarchates or within patriarchates in themselves. Look at Rome. Look at the Western Patriarchate with all the Dominican schools, the Augustinian schools, the Franciscan schools, and even within the Franciscans, you have the Bonaventurians, the Suazians, the Scotists. Among the Jesuits, you have the Bellarmites, you have the Molinists, you have the Suazians. Among the Dominicans, even they divide between Benesians and followers of Marina Sola and of Lagrange. So different theological schools do not impede or obstruct the overall unity of the church. So neither does recognizing clearly the unique identity of the Eastern rites. And this is important in how you approach your own reading and how you root yourself in your own unique fathers. So just like Ephraim is somebody who's universal to all because he's a doctor of the church, and all saints are universal to all, it still remains upon each person, whether they are within a patriarchate or whether they're in their own country, to have a specific affection to saints and theologians from their own right. And this is key. See, we aren't actually supposed to have a general unanimity of expression of affection to all saints. And the reason isn't because they're not all equally worthwhile having devotion to. It's not. In fact, if we could, we ought to love them all and know them all. But because of the human limitation of our capacity to know things, which also puts a limit on our capacity to love things, we have a limited amount of time of how much we can read and study and learn. And so, if you're a Franciscan who doesn't want to study Scotus and Bonaventure and the life of St. Francis, and all you want to do is read Thomas, John of Thomas, and Barnes, and study the life of St. Dominic, then maybe you should have been a Dominican, because when you join a particular order, you're automatically, by joining it, a certain affection to those who are from your order. And because of that, they form the basis and the principal concern of your energy. Beyond that, you can, of course, read as much of the other saints and other orders as you want, provided you've done what is required and what you owe to your own right. And the same thing applies at the level of the different rites of the church. Of course, a Maronite can know, love, and attend the various liturgical rites and theological patrimonies of the Roman Rite, of the Greek Church, of the Alexandrian Church, as long as that's rooted in the honor that they owe their own liturgical and theological patrimony on account of the fact that God ordained for you to be born and graced there. And so by separating and passing out the various identities involved within the broader Eastern Catholic communities, you can see how not just to approach theological and historical questions more accurately, you can also learn how to approach your own theological and spiritual identity